You know, they say it's not how you start, but how you finish. And while often that is true, as it turns out, it does matter when you don't actually start until 35 minutes through a 60-minute game. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken lose another one, their third straight and second one in a row since returning from the long break, to the New Jersey Devils 3-1. And I do usually try to be a little bit more positive and think optimistically about the Kraken or any team that I cheer for, because I find being a fan is just more fun that way. But if you think I'm being too harsh on them by saying they didn't start playing this game until 35 minutes into it, well, it's not me saying it, that's pretty much exactly what Hackstall said after the game. Now sure, on the optimistic end, they did finish strong and they did play their best hockey in the third period, which is usually what you want. The problem is that horrible start for the first 35 minutes, if not a little bit more, got them to a 3-0 deficit. And you know what, I'll even concede for the more optimistic fans that usually I find myself among, that this is the type of loss, if it was early on in the season with that strong finish, you could think positively going into the next few games that even though they didn't have the great start, they did seem to figure some things out down the stretch, and if they can just get that to happen for the majority of the game, or heck, even some parts of the first half of it, then they have a pretty good chance. Not to mention that once again, they were getting great goaltending from Joey Daccord. Or at least very good goaltending, if not great. Unfortunately, though, we're just not at a point in the season anymore where we can afford to think about games like this one in that way. We are very much now in the part of the season where the Kraken, who are, again, like I've said a number of times, in that tight wildcard race with 5 other teams for 2 spots, they need to be getting every point they can and cannot afford to just not show up for the first 35 minutes of a game, especially against a team in the Devils that are likewise trying to save their season and get back into a wild card race. Now sure, the Kraken do get a bit lucky that 2 of the other 3 teams in that wild card race in the West that played the same night did lose, but the Wild still won, and any win or any 2 points that a team picks up on the Kraken is going to make it that much harder for them to jump teams to get into one of those 2 wildcard spots. And we can still pretty much forget about one of those top 3 spots in the Pacific. And I have also a number of times, and probably will come up again, mentioned the fact that the Kraken, especially once we get to March, have the easiest schedule left in the NHL. Unfortunately, it's starting to get to a point with the Kraken playing the way that they have going into the break with that loss to one of those easiest teams in the Sharks, and now these 2 games coming out of the break, it's starting to raise questions about whether or not we get to a point where once March hits, whether or not the Kraken are even fighting realistically for one of those wildcard spots, and maybe you should think about being sellers at the trade deadline. Now, with that being said, I'm still not there quite yet with this team. Even with things starting to head in that direction, I'm definitely not as low on them or their chances of making the playoffs as I was back at the start of December at the end of that 8-game losing streak. And what do you know, they go on a 9-game winning streak, turn things around, got themselves back in this playoff race in the first place, heck, for a very short window of time, or even in one of those 2 wildcard spots. So it's definitely possible, especially with that remaining schedule, that they could go on that same run and end up in one of those spots, and even in control of one going into the last few games like they were at the end of last season. But for that to happen, they definitely need to start playing better throughout the entire course of a game and start putting some 60-minute efforts back out on the ice, which we really just haven't seen since pretty much the end of that 9-game winning streak. So then, what do the Kraken need to do to get back to playing the way that they were during that 9-game winning streak? And not that we're expecting another winning streak of that length this season. Heck, those are rare for a reason. There's a number of franchises in the NHL that don't even have a winning streak in their history as long as the one the Kraken had earlier this season, but still getting back to a point where they're winning the vast majority of their games, or at least looking competitive in them, which just was not the case for the vast majority of this game. Now, the big one, obviously, is goal scoring, and it's been an issue pretty much all season long, with the exceptions of some stretches here and there. It's a team that just has not been able to find that offensive drive that they had last season. Now, yes, as I'm sure some people want to point out, and I think it's fair to do so, luck does play somewhat of a role in the Kraken issues offensively. They definitely have not been as lucky of a team offensively as they were last season, and you can see that to some extent in shooting percentage, though there still is a lot more to shooting percentage, like how dangerous the shots the Kraken are getting. And that, I think, does start to get a little bit more at the heart of where the Kraken's issues have been offensively this season versus certainly last season. Where last season, one of the things that they were fantastic at doing was creating offense off the rush, with great transition through the neutral zone, and then creating either odd man chances or open looks closer to the net that certainly are more dangerous than, say, a shot from well out without traffic in front of the net. And while the Kraken have been able to make that happen here and there this season, it's been pretty streaky at best. It happens in bursts, but disappears and then doesn't show up for large chunks of time. And that often tends to coincide with these losing streaks the Kraken go on where they string together these losses. Now, with that said, while it is a good way to generate offense and get those dangerous looks, you don't need to live and die by the rush offensively. And one way to make up for a lack of ability to generate those rushes on a consistent basis is by being good on the forecheck and getting to those pucks along the boards and winning those battles, which the Kraken, once again, were fantastic at doing last season. But this season, especially here over these last couple of games, just have not been able to do. And honestly, I think that was the bigger issue in this game specifically, where for the first 35 minutes of the game, the Kraken just couldn't find any offense. It wasn't because they were bad in transition. In fact, they were transitioning pretty well through the neutral zone. Just once they got into the offensive end, they could not get anything set up offensively. The Devils would just end up taking the puck away and turning it right back to the other end of the ice. And defensively, the Kraken did a pretty good job of limiting the rush chances for the Devils, but unlike the Kraken, the Devils were frequently able to get set up and create those shots on net, or at least offensive chances in general. Now, I suppose to be perfectly fair, the Kraken did do a fine job at 5-on-5 in the first period. The one goal that they do allow to give up that 1-0 lead, yet again playing from behind, was on a Devils power play. And that is another issue the Kraken have had, and this one's been more consistent pretty much throughout their history of special teams being a large weakness for this team. Really, the only stretch of time, well, significant stretch of time, that they've been good on one side or the other was the back half of last season, where the penalty kill was fantastic. But aside from stretches of a week or two here and there, neither the penalty kill or power play have been consistently good for the Kraken throughout their 2 and now over half years of existence. And you know what, since we're on the subject with the penalty kill specifically, it would be one thing if the Kraken were struggling on the kill against some of the best power plays in the NHL, like we kind of saw them do right at the end of that winning streak back in the middle of January. But here, coming out of the break, they've now given up a power play goal in each of the first 2 teams out of the break to 2 of the coldest power plays the league has to offer. They gave up one to the Flyers, the first one of that game, when the Flyers came into that one on an 0-for-11 streak on the power play. And now they give up one to the Devils on the second power play of this game, as they had an 0-for-22 streak coming into the game, and then it was 0-for-23 when they score here on their second power play of the first period. To be fair, it is a bit of a lucky one, as it's a shot from the high slot that ends up going off the shin of Tanev on the way to the net, and that does kind of make it a weirdly bouncing puck that just finds a way to get over the pad of Decord. So yeah, bad luck definitely playing a bit of a role there, but either way, the Kraken penalty kill has been an issue here over the last few weeks, if nothing else. And again, it's not like the power play's been much better, as they go 0-for-3 in this game, and also when not only I think it was 0-for-2 in the game against the Flyers, but gave up a shorthanded goal. So once again, we find ourselves in a situation where both Kraken special team units are not getting the job done, to say the very least. So then you'd think maybe just stay out of the box and stay away from special teams, but instead the Kraken send the Devils to 5 power plays in this game. They do give up just the 1 power play goal, but still not the type of game you want to be playing when you can't get anything to happen on either power play or penalty kill. And to make matters worse, when it comes to this game specifically, things don't get much better for the Kraken at 5-on-5 when we start the second period, as the Devils do not take long to make it 2-0. And it comes off of a turnover by Matty Beniers in the defensive end right by the blue line, as he's just kind of lazy with the puck trying to get it into the neutral zone, something that's pretty uncharacteristic for him. I know it hasn't been a great season for him offensively. In fact, as much as I hate to say it, it has been a straight up horrible sophomore slump for him in the offensive end of the ice. But defensively, he's still been pretty good and one of the best Kraken players in transition through the neutral zone. I'd say he and Wemberg are easily the 2 best at handling the puck through the center of the ice. But this was a terrible mistake by Beniers, especially by the blue line. It turns the puck over, quickly gets on the stick of Hughes. Hughes skates down to the corner, and from below the goal line, puts it off the side of the mask of Decord and into the net. Just a very nice, skillful play by Hughes, and it makes it 2-0. I should clarify, Jack Hughes, not Luke Hughes, who's the younger Hughes brother on the same team. This is the forward version, who's a little bit older, and, well, better at this point in time. And as far as Decord's part in this one, it's hard to blame him too much. It's just a very skillful play, especially with the shot coming, again, from behind the goal line in the corner. So you just gotta tip your cap to him and learn from it going forward, which, it has to be said, for Decord, he definitely did learn from it, as there was a very similar play developing for Hughes in that same spot of the ice in the third period, or so I guess on the other end of the ice, and Decord just slammed himself right up against the post, even putting his head to the corner, which you don't usually see a goaltender do, but he was not about to let that same thing happen a second time. Unfortunately though, the puck does end up past him one more time this period, and it's just a couple minutes later as the Devils get a rush chance and a bit of a misplay here by Riker Evans, who's a little bit too slow on the back check. He ends up letting a guy past him, which does allow a rush chance, even if it's not necessarily a true breakaway. It's kind of a partial break, so the shot gets on net. Decord makes the save, but the rebound goes out to the other side, where Alexiak just kind of drifts a little bit too far away from his guy, and that rebound ends up then in the back of the net. Which, it has to be said, defensively as a whole for the Kraken, this has started to become a bit of an issue really since, again, the end of that winning streak, where the Kraken were fantastic at locking down the center of the ice. Even when there was a rush chance, they did not allow rebound opportunities. For one, Decord's been very good at controlling rebounds, but even when he did allow a rebound in instances like this one where he just doesn't have a chance to do anything else, the Kraken were right on top of that and getting the puck to the outside, not allowing those second chances. But that has become a bit of an issue, and there were a number of second chances off of rebounds in just this game alone. Fortunately, this is the only one that actually ends up in the net, but Decord had to come up with some spectacular saves to make sure that this was the only rebound that got past him. And for everything I've said about the offensive struggles of the Kraken here of late, that is something defensively they need to clean up here quickly if they want to start to win games consistently, especially when they're allowing 30 plus shots on goal per game like they have here over the last couple. So anyway, back to the game where the Kraken are now trailing 3-0, and things don't get much better as the Devils continue to get offensive pressure. And it has to be said, the officiating has a pretty tough time of it here through the middle part of the period, as they kind of just jump right on the Devils bandwagon and have a few minutes of straight up just helping New Jersey get more chances. One of which actually ends up in the back of the net and is called a goal on the ice. The Kraken have to challenge it for goaltender interference, and it is about as textbook, blatantly obvious goaltender interference as you're ever going to see. In fact, it's so bad that it raises some pretty good questions as to how that wasn't seen in the action and called a penalty as it should have been. Now, it's hard to complain too much about the Kraken not getting a power play opportunity with how bad the power play has been, but even still, this is a call that you have to make. Fortunately, they do at least get it right on the replay and take the goal off the board, but it's still a terrible look for some horrendous officiating here in the middle part of the second period. And there were a few things the officials definitely did not get right, mostly non-calls here in the middle part of the second, and I'm not going to go over all of them because, again, they really don't have an effect on the outcome of the game. The Kraken were already down 3-0 before the officials had any kind of impact on the game, and like I said, more special teams probably wasn't going to help the Kraken anyway. But one that I will mention is just a couple minutes later when the Devils get their third power play of the game, and it comes off of a play that, I gotta say, does start with what should have been a call against Borgen for holding along the boards in front of the Devils bench, but they don't call that, let the play go, and then it turns into a scrum between Borgen and I can't remember who he was fighting with. Eventually Borgen gets his helmet ripped off, which is a penalty. And look, I understand that Borgen was interfering with him or holding him. Eventually it's an interference call that Borgen ends up drawing, but you made the decision to let that hold go and let the play keep going, which then leads to Borgen getting his helmet ripped off. So if you're just going to give Borgen the call, you have to send him to the box for the initial thing and not let that play continue to develop before it turns into something more, and then just say that that's apparently okay and you can start ripping helmets off of guys' heads now. Either way, the Orange Stripes galaxy brain their way into sending just Borgen to the box and not Palat with him, who, now that I think about it, is the other guy involved here, and the Devils get that power play, which also, now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure it's on this power play where that whole goal and goaltender interference actually ends up happening. And for what that's worth, it's Holla that makes contact with Decord here, and it was not the first time that he made goaltender interference worthy contact with Decord. And the refs just let that go all game long. For what it's worth, the Kraken also let it go without any kind of retaliation on Holla whatsoever, something that most of the teams in the NHL would come after a guy after bumping their goaltender that many times unchecked. Either way, that's never really been a part of the Kraken identity to, I don't know if you want to call it stick up for a teammate, whatever the case. In the end, Decord has a fantastic penalty kill, really saving the Kraken here and preventing this from becoming 4-0. And then not long after, the Devils get another power play, which the Kraken do kill off. Still 4-0. Eventually the Kraken get a power play. That doesn't go anywhere, so we go to the third with the Kraken still trailing 3-0. And okay, yes, I suppose to be fair to the Kraken, they do start to finally turn things around towards the last few minutes of this second period. Really, they start to get momentum going during that second penalty kill. but it's just not enough for them. They do almost score on a couple of occasions, and it really is just bad puck luck that doesn't get at least one of these two across the line, one of which is a horrible misplay behind the net by the Devils goaltender, who, off the top of my head, I can't remember who it was in net for them. Either way, he goes back to play the puck, ends up turning it over, and the play ends up in his legs as he's spinning around trying to find it in front of the net, and somehow it just bounces out or gets flung away out of the crease. It easily could have ended up in the back of the net. In fact, more often than not, that probably does end up in the net with the goaltender out and having no idea where the puck is. Still, the Devils get a bit lucky there. That one stays out. And then late in the period, the Kraken get one to get through him, right through the 5-hole. It squeaks down onto the goal line, but just will not cross the goal line, eventually shoveled into the pads of the goaltender, frozen, and the Kraken can't get on the board. So again, like I said, 3-0 going into the third. And then in the third, it's just too little too late for the Kraken. It doesn't help that the third starts out with more special teams, an early power play for the Devils, matched by a power play for the Kraken. Neither one goes anywhere, but it makes it hard to really get in the flow of the period and create any momentum. I mean, sure, the Kraken probably could have created momentum out of their power play, which was the second one, or even scored on it. Obviously, that doesn't happen, and eventually, the Kraken do at least break up the shutout about halfway through. It's a nice little play on, I don't know if you really call it a rush. Either way, the Kraken get into the offensive end. A nice little passing play is finished by Eberle, who passes it out to Borgen. Borgen fires off a shot from right on the edge of the faceoff circle, finds the back of the net for his second of the season, and the Kraken at least prevent from being the first team shut out by the Devils so far this year. Still, it doesn't really amount to much. Even though the Kraken do have a fantastic end to this third period, they can't find the back of the net for a second time to get this game at least close by the time the net goes empty, which the Devils never end up hitting the empty net. So I guess the Kraken prevent from the score looking even worse on the scoreboard. Either way, it doesn't matter. They drop the 2 points in the standings, and it's a loss either way. So then one more time to summarize, the Kraken end up losing this game because they don't show up for the first 35 minutes. After going down 1-0 because of bad special teams in the first period, they start out the second period with 15 minutes of getting outshot 1-16 for the Devils. Finally show up in the last few minutes of the second, but can't carry that momentum into the third. And although they do end up breaking up the shutout and getting some late pressure in the third period, it's too little too late. They don't get what is a very much needed win, or 2 points in the standings, as they're still now 6 points out of a wildcard spot. They now go into the second half of a back-to-back, which will be the first start for Grubauer in 2 months. And look, I still think more of Grubauer than certainly some people in the fan base do, but it's a tough way to be coming back for your first start in 2 months. So almost no matter how Grubauer plays in this upcoming game, today probably as of when you're watching this, against the Islanders, it's a tough spot to be in for your first game back in 2 months, coming off an injury and then riding the bench for a few weeks, to be playing against one of the most structured teams in the NHL. And while they're not one of the most offensive heavy teams, and that should make Grubauer's job at least not as heavy when it comes to the shot totals as what Decord's faced in these last 2 games, it will mean a lot of sitting around and then probably facing some rush chances, like he's pretty much done throughout his entire Kraken career. Not to mention the fact that he and everyone else is very well aware that the Kraken desperately need to win that game. Which, with that in mind, and since I've already talked quite a bit about what the Kraken need to do better moving forward, not only in that game but the rest of the season, let's just close out with the Kraken 3 stars and get to what hopefully will be a better outcome against the Islanders. As always, the Kraken 3 stars brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you want to help decide the 3 stars after every Kraken game where there are stars, you can help support the channel a little bit more than you already are by watching to this point, which I do appreciate, by going to the link down below and supporting on Patreon as well. And with the 3 stars, well, I will admit that if the Kraken had got shut out, I might not have given any, and I was still tempted to not give 3, and honestly, this is probably a game where it's deserving of just 1 or 2 stars. I feel like the vibes are low enough that we might as well at least get some good energy coming here into this next game, so I will go 3 stars. Decord is the one that I probably would have gone with no matter what, if for no other reason than he's been an absolute hero for the Kraken and Iron Man in net, not only because of the number of games he's been playing in a row, but also facing the number of shots and now defensive breakdowns in front of him. Then the second star, I'll go Will Borgen. He gets his second goal of the season, so yeah, what the heck, we'll give him one, especially since his D partner did not have a very good night in Alexiak. Again, Alexiak kind of sticking with this trend he's had as a Kraken player of having a fantastic half of a season on one side, and then a not so great half on the other. And then the third star, I could go either Vince Dunn or Jared McCann. Both had fantastic games, even if somewhat muted because of the outcome of the game, but I'll end up going McCann. He really did play well enough to probably score at least once in this game, just doesn't have that bounce that he needs, or I mean, he did end up sending a couple of pretty wide open, dangerous shots just wide at the net, but either way, to get the good vibes, we'll go 3 stars. Decord and Borgen for sure, 1 and 2, and then I'll go McCann for the third. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you don't think it's worthy of 3 stars, I totally understand. Otherwise, what other stars you might have done differently. Until next time, though, which will be pretty soon here, in fact, 24 hours from now, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.